professor, theater artist, and singer-songwriter. Her published work includes a novel, a book on the craft of writing, and most recently of the award-winning memoir, Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. She is presenting today overlapping strategies in the writing of fiction and memoir. So let's welcome Sans Hall.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, and thank you all, Margie. Thank you. I really want to special thank you to Margie, because the degree of organization and advance notice and very clear instructions just seems to indicate the kind of wonderfully organized organization this is, and I'm very grateful to it. It was really great to be in touch with her so early and to have such clear parameters. I am indeed talking today on strategies about fiction and memoir. And I just want to start by saying I'm curiously very moved, because sitting here in the Rose Room of City Hall, I am reminded that I had many ancestors here, the Chamberlains, on my mother's side. She grew up in Sacramento Delta area and had many, many family members here, and some of them were in this hall being political people. So that's just all of a sudden it kind of came wavering over me. So very, very, very lovely to be here. Just a general note that I'm certainly happy to take questions as I speak, but perhaps if something particular crops up, just take a note of it, because I always find the Q&A sessions at the end often open up wonderful things, and so please take notes if you have questions. I'd love to have a give and take with you all. I started my writing life, well actually I started my writing life never thinking I'd be a writer, because that was my dad's job, right? You know, he was the writer at Oakley Hall. But then I always did kind of write extensively in journals for a long time. And then when I began to put my own life together, there was, you know, singing and songwriting always was hovering there. But I always thought of myself, once I did begin to write, as a fiction writer. That is where I began. Those were the classes that I taught. Those were the MFA I received. That was where I focused all my attention. I conducted many, many classes, trying to get my craft up as high as it could be. I'm a great believer in craft. The name of my book is, you know, of craft tips, is Tools of the Writer's Craft, because I feel there's so much that we have absolutely no control over. The zeitgeist currently going in the world, or who gets picked for what reasons books. It's just a great big mystery, I think, for all of us. But one thing we can control is our craft. We can always get a bit better at what we're trying to do. And when I say better, what I really mean is effective. What we want from readers is to have them do that magical thing, which is turn the page. That is what all of us want, or I suppose on Kindle, you know, swipe or poke or whatever it is, but it's we want to grab them and move them forward. And to that degree, I think all books are mysteries, because the reader reads to find out. And that is true whether it's a Le Carré thriller, or it's, you know, Michelle Obama's lovely memoir, Becoming. You know, each of those things we're reading to find something out. So those are some of the intrinsic things I was working on as a fiction writer, as a teacher of fiction, as an editor of fiction manuscripts. That was where I put all of my effort. So there was this period of my life where I became a member of the church/cult of Scientology. And when I finally managed to extricate myself from that almost 10 years of engagement with that, I spent another 10 years sort of pretending that 10 years of my life hadn't happened. And you can't really live like that, right? So I was teaching back east at a college called Franklin and Marshall, where I was so fortunate to be a professor of creative writing. One of those things I was supposed to be a one-year sabbatical replacement, and 12 years later I decided to retire. It was one of those things I just feel the universe gifted me after that debacle of a decade in Scientology. So I was, amongst the courses, I was fortunate enough to be able to put together, to compile, to propose, to compile, and to teach year after year, was a course called Introduction to Myth and Fairy Tale. And of course, I saw the similarities of myth and fairy tale is that often in fairy tale, characters go into woods where things happen to them. And one of the things I remembered clearly from this was all when I was beginning to think about this course as a course, one of the intrinsic things I remembered, of course, was my brief brush with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and the idea that a hero goes into the underworld, into the darkness there, and often confronts things and comes back to his original life or her life, sort of changed in some intrinsic way, but back to the life as usual. So I felt in this course that one of the things I wanted to do to communicate to my students passionately is that if they could take on that idea that in the darkness there are lessons to be learned, that in that descent into the underworld and the grappling with whatever underworldly things are down in there, the darkness and the beasts and the difficulty, and as Joseph Campbell says, sometimes you die to yourself. What does that mean? It's very interesting. But if you can grapple with the idea that darkness has something inside of it for you, if you can just maintain that idea, that then darkness doesn't have to be so scary, and you know that you can learn something from it and return to life with a lesson learned. This seemed to me one of the most important things I could possibly convey to my students. And at a certain point, this little voice began to say, "You can always look at your years in Scientology that way." And it was like, no, that is just an error. And then it would just come nudging at me. You know, there was kind of a hero's journey in there in the traditional Campbell sense, if you kind of want to shh. But it really began to tug at me. And so I began to find myself working on a memoir, trying to grapple with those years. And I really wasn't thinking of it as a publication even. I was thinking of it a way to come to terms with what got me in, why did I stay, all those questions I think people who are working on memoir, because often memoir takes on a particular time in life. What was it that I was grappling with? And little by little I began to realize, scary though it would be, because Scientology is actually, as you all probably know, is vicious about anything negative about it in the world, I finally decided, okay, I am working on a memoir. And then to my delight, I discovered that so many aspects of craft that I had worked on so hard as a fiction writer were serving me incredibly well as I worked on my memoir. And so that is some of what I want. That's sort of a long introduction to let you know what it is that I would like to address a little bit today. A couple of general things, ideas, and then we'll look at some specifics with some excerpts and examples that we can take a look at. And in this regard, I want to thank Phil and Michael for hopefully getting this thing to work so that when I actually turn on my laptop, up comes some excerpts.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, we will hope. So here are the things that I think are similar in nature between the two. And some of these I think are rather obvious. One is story. We have to have a story. It needs to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And something has to happen. And I think, they're all kind of, experimental and different kinds of writing do different things, but I believe that one of the reasons we read is to see how a person changes, that something shifts in their consciousness, in their behavior, something about them, and how they're engaging with the world. So I think those are intrinsic parts of story. Something has to change, something has to happen. Those things are certainly true between a memoir and a novel or a short story or essay. Also, sometimes we don't necessarily think about this when we're working on a memoir, but the idea of a narrator. We think about it totally when we're working on fiction, because of course someone has to be telling the story to the reader. But that is just as essential in the memoir world, which is who is telling the story. And of course on one hand you can say, well, it's me. But I know, and probably those of you who've been working on memoir, or have worked on memoir, or essays about childhood or whatever, you know that there's actually this big difference between the older you, looking back on the experience, and the younger you, with effective writing, delivering that lived experience to the reader as it was lived then. So we have at least two narrators in Memoir. We have what I like to call the older, wiser narrator, the live to tell the tale narrator, and the younger one is going through information stuff. So those become, as we could go into this talk a little bit, I'll talk even further about how important those distinctions are. So narrator, obviously very important. Another thing having to do with story is plot. Something has to happen. And this is sometimes where we fall into problems with memoir because it's not just enough. One of the great gifts that Scientology gave me, which I'm actually happy to be able, and that was the great thing about my memoirs called Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology, was to be able to go back in there and realize what it was that I had learned down there in that darkness, so-called, and that I brought back to my life and that I continue to utilize. One of them is, with great pleasure, is etymology, where words come from. And one of the things I love to think about is the difference between an autobiography and a memoir. An autobiography, if you just take the roots of those words, it's auto, self, bio, life, writing. So it's literally writing one's biography. Memoir has a slightly different thing. There's that word memory in it, and often a memoir, by distinction, takes on a particular incident, a series of months, in my case, a time of almost a decade of getting in and then out of this church, and even after that, really, because sometimes it's so hard to know where to end a memoir. I keep learning lessons, I want the reader to know, so you have to at some point put the frame on. So memoir has much more of a specific time that it's taking on. Autobiography has much more of a, here's my story, or here's my story. And so when we're looking at plot, an autobiography delivers probably the life story. It might not start, I was born in, but sooner or later, that is the sort of arc you're going to get. In a memoir, you're dealing a lot more with something specific that happened, and often that will tie into structure. How do we get the story across? One of the things I love to think about plot is that it's not only that the reader finds out what happens. Importantly, it's the order in which the reader finds out what happens. We all have read mysteries. The first thing we find out is, there's a dead body. But we spend the book backing up in time to visit all of the possible suspects, what they were doing at one particular time. Meanwhile, the forward motion of the story is also going on. So structurally, that is not unlike how we often deal with a memoir, which is, here's this thing that happened, let me go back and fill in how that came to pass, let me also move forward with the ongoing story. So structure becomes incredibly important and I think fascinating, and may I just say that John McPhee, on the subject of structure, essay in the New Yorker, easily accessible, is just so wise and marvelous, and I recommend it to anybody who's hassling with that concept of structure. So far we've got story and then plot, narrator. Narrator leads into the concept of character, of course, and character development. Again, in fiction, we understand pretty abruptly that the moment we're beginning to meet someone on the page, we're getting to know them. Well, that has to be true in memoir as well. We have to get to know the character who's going to be telling the story, the narrator, right? So how do we do that cleverly, effectively, so that we're not just saying, I was born, right? But rather, how do we place the reader right smack dab in the middle of the conflict or the dilemma or the problem that we are facing, as whether we're writing fiction or memoir, is equally important. So that character development, because that's, of course, what we're following. We want to go rising, 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 climax, in the denouement. It's like it's a classic structure, but the thing is, it works. So that's why it keeps lasting in the world from, early Greek times on. So, and one of the things we will talk a lot about today is essential to both forms is scene. All stories unfold in scene. And I'm actually teaching a little workshop, weekend intensive towards the end of the year, last weekend of November, because I think this is such an essential thing to understand, to build a scene whether we're working on memoir, we're working on creative nonfiction, we're working on fiction, we're working on plays, we're working on screenplay. There is so much that's elemental to building an effective scene. So I'll spend a bit of time on that today with some excerpts. Obviously, sometimes we're going to be, in both cases, there's going to be what is the story about, what's the thematic concerns, and those things, for me anyway as a writer, often don't emerge till late into the drafting process. I often, like, oh, I think I have it, and then the next draft, oh no, now I think I have it. And then sometimes, like that was very true with Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. It was finally I got what the story was about, and then rewrote that final draft with that in mind. So we're going to look at various things, and I think there is one major difference between fiction and memoir, although so much depends on style, and everybody in this room, myself included, is working on a personal style. One of the reasons you're reading, one of the reasons you're attending a workshop like this, one of the reasons that you read about writing and write yourself and then read as a writer is because you're trying to develop what you think effective writing is. And one of the things I love about bookstores, which is incredibly clear in a brick and mortar, but even when you go on Amazon, is that there are so many kinds of books. And when you go into a bookstore, you see a bunch of people huddled over here, and you see a bunch of people huddled over here, and it's all the memoir section, right? Or, maybe it's alphabetical, but a lot of times it's what is it that they're looking for, right? There's the people who want the mysteries, and there's the people that want the self-help, and I love that about books and writers. We're all figuring out our way and our place. So all of these comments are delivered with humility. These are just thoughts for me that work for me currently, and I would like to just sort of share those ideas with you. So let's begin first with the concept of narrator. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and then we're going to look at some examples. I've talked a little bit about how character ties into plot. I remember that, I think it's Henry James, said something marvelously cogent, which is something like, what is character but plot personified? What is plot but character in motion? What is character but plot personified? What is character? What is plot but character in action? So those are really nice things. They're so intertwined, and we can sometimes say that people working on more genre fiction of, I think everything genre. I think what they call literary fiction is a genre too. So, but genre fiction often it's like they'll say, oh well, they work on plot more than character. No. I think John le Carré is one of the most intelligent, psychologically acute, astonishing writers working, or is he still with us? No, I think he died. So, and his novels are an incredible, imagine writing a chapter 1 that reads like most books, penultimate chapter, right? He is just so good at grabbing us and getting us and psychologically acute. So I think what we need to do is an idea of plot and character are utterly intertwined. And that is what we have to unfold, whether we're working on memoir or in fiction. And something I believe in deeply is probably at the absolute basis of all my teaching, and I think it's because I was involved with theater for so long, is that how we find out about people powerfully is what they're doing, what we find them doing, where we find them being. The very fact that this group of people is in a room with a carpet that's not full of roses, but yeah, it is, roses, and with pencils and paper and taking notes in Auburn, all of those things, and it's a beautiful, beautiful fall day outside, all of those things add up to some sort of character decision, right? Here you are, here I am. That's just a wonderful thing. So we begin to establish character the minute we find somebody in a place, the minute we see what they are doing. So setting an activity become incredibly important, and we'll dive deeply into that. So what I would like to do right now, let's see if it's going to magically happen, is look at a few openings with these in mind. This is the opening of Cheryl Strayed's Wild, which is, of course, a memoir. And amongst all of the things I've already addressed in terms of character, narrator, launching plot. I think this is a really excellent example of all of those, and I'm just very grateful to Michael to continue to try and get it up on the screen for you to see, but you know, in the olden days you just had to listen.
Yeah.
So, so notice, I'm just going to look at the openings and then we're going to come back and sort of read a bit longer, but the opening here. Establishing narrator, establishing character, launching plot. The trees were tall, but I was taller, standing above them on a steep mountain slope in Northern California. Moments before, I'd removed my hiking boots and the left one had fallen into those trees, first catapulting in the air when my enormous backpack toppled onto it, then skittering across the gravelly trail and flying over the edge. It bounced off a rocky outcropping several feet beneath me before the boots skittering off the path, disappearing into the forest canopy below, impossible to retrieve. I let out a stunned gasp, though I'd been in the wilderness 38 days, and by then I'd come to know that anything could happen and that everything would. But that doesn't mean I wasn't shocked when it did. My boot was gone, actually gone. Now, you can see how much work's being done here, right? We are already understanding that she is walking and has been for 38 days. So without our even noticing, all this information is being placed into our minds. We are beginning to understand something about her. She is not probably like most of us, right? Most of us would probably not go hike with an enormous backpack for 38, well, several months on the Pacific Coast Trail, but we're beginning to understand something about her. Also, we understand that her boot has gone away, so there's a heightened sense of tension and mystery, right? So I'm going to read the rest of this right now because I'm going to move on a little bit fast here because I was going to save it, but here's what happens next. My boot was gone, actually gone. I clutched its mate to my chest like a baby, though of course it was futile. What is one boot without the other boot? It is nothing, it is useless, an orphan forevermore, and I could take no mercy on it. It was a big lug of a thing of genuine heft, a brown leather rakeley boot with a red lace and silver metal fasts. I lifted it high and threw it with all my might and watched it fall into the lush trees and out of my life. Now, mystery and craziness and what the heck, right? But we are totally engaged. She has just thrown her second boot after the first. Also, intriguingly, is an amazing bit of language. What is one boot without the other boot? Is an orphan forevermore, and I could take no mercy on it. Right? It comes at you, you know, and you read on, but it's like, and then you come to understand she's an orphan too. There's all this stuff, but she is placing all of this stuff in the first 3 paragraphs, and one of those paragraphs is 7 words long that she has developed. So here we are getting character, problem, dilemma, and here's a structural point I think is really interesting. We will return to this exact incident 2/3 of the way through the book, because she is starting her book here, and for reasons which I will come back to when we look at the longer piece. Here's another one I want to look at. This is from a novel, Girl on the Train. Let's again notice where we're starting, what's happening right away. The pre-mixed gin and tonic fizzes up over the lip of the can. Right away, like, oh my God, really? Anyway, the pre-mixed gin and tonic fizzes up over the lip of the can as I bring it to my mouth and sip. Tangy and cold, the taste of my first ever holiday with Tom, a fishing village on the Basque Coast in 2005. In the mornings, we'd swim the half-mile to the little island in the bay, make love on secret hidden beaches. In the afternoons, we'd sit at a bar drinking strong, bitter gin and tonics, watching swarms of beach footballers playing chaotic 5-a-side games on the low-tide sands. I'd take another sip, and another. The can's already half empty, but that's okay. I have 3 more in the plastic bag at my feet. It's Friday, and I don't have to feel guilty about drinking on the train. TGIF, the fun starts here. Now, we are very clearly in the middle of a dilemma with this character, right? We are already knowing something. I'll tell you something else I find very interesting. Of course, there's that pre-mixed gin and tonic, which I just think those pre-mixed, if you're going to have a cocktail, I mean, come on. Anyway, that's one thing. And that there's 4 in the can in the bag at her feet. So we know there's a problem. She is the author is completely, and this is a fictional character, of course, not memoir. But the other thing I think is so remarkable, when I first read this book, and I'd been hearing a lot about it, you know, blah, 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 how great it was, and I thought, okay, you should read it. So first of all, I put my little mental hands on my little mental hips and said, "What is that? A flashback in the very first paragraph." And then, of course, you realize that her dilemma is that she is living totally in the past. Everything is back there when things were good. And that is going to play an enormous role in the book. So that choice by the writer let me, even though I was sitting there, you know, but as I read on, I went, look what's happening. And you will too as we read further on into this. Here is the opening of Becoming, Michelle Obama's lovely memoir. This is the end of her preface. So let me start here, she writes, with a small thing that happened not long ago. I was at home in the red brick house that my family recently moved into. Our new house sits about 2 miles from our old house on a quiet neighborhood street. We're still settling into the family room. Our furniture is arranged in the same as it was in the White House. We've got mementos around the house that remind us it was all real. Photos of our family time at Camp David, handmade pots given to me by Native American students, a book signed by Nelson Mandela. What was strange about this night was that everyone was gone. Barack was traveling, Sasha was out with friends, and Malia has been living and working in New York, finishing out her gap year before college. It was just me, our 2 dogs, and a silent, empty house like I haven't known in decades. Actually, she says 8 years. And I was hungry. I walked down the stairs from our bedroom with the dogs falling on my heels. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge. I found a loaf of bread, took out 2 pieces, and laid them in the toaster oven. I opened a cabinet and got out a plate. I know it's a weird thing to say, but to take a plate from a shelf in the kitchen without anyone first insisting that it get it for me, to stand by myself watching bread turn brown in the toaster, feels as close to a return to my old life as though I've come. Or maybe it's my new life, just beginning to assert itself.
Wow.
Beautiful use, right there, of establishing in a place and an activity a lot of information. I think it's just a marvelous job that she does here with this particular thing. And again, we'll come back to this. I don't know how many of you have discovered Tana French's Extraordinary Mysteries. They're so delicious. This is the opening of The Searcher, and I think the author does an extraordinary job to establish, again, a fictional narrator. And I'm only going to read the first bit, but I'm going to talk about it because when I first read this, I was agog with all she had managed to place into 2 paragraphs, very short paragraphs. When Cal comes out of the house, the rooks have got hold of something. 6 of them are clustered on the back lawn amid the long wet grass and the yellow flowered weeds, jabbing and hopping. Whatever the thing is, it's on the small side and still moving.
Oh.
Cal sets down his garbage bag of wallpaper. He considers getting his hunting knife and putting the creature out of its suffering. But the rooks have been here a lot longer than he has. It would be pretty impertinent of him to waltz in and start interfering in their ways. Instead, he eases himself down to sit on the mossy step next to the trash bag. Look at I've heard this moan over here. That thing that the rooks are jabbing at that's still moving lets me know what I am in for in the entire book, right? It helps that I know that Tana French is a mystery writer. She writes really great mysteries. But I also know, look what's there. Then look at the character that's being created for us, right? He thinks about putting it out of its misery, but that would be impertinent. We understand he's newly come to this place. We understand with that wonderful bag of wallpaper, that he's been taking that off, he's doing something to that house. So much gets established within 2 paragraphs by The Searcher. And again, we'll come back to this as well. But I just was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening, when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. It was just after dark. A blustering March wind whipped the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading.
Oh.
She's in a taxi. Completely indicates some kind of status, right? She's wondering if she has overdressed for the evening. She's on her way to the party. We get that at the end. And there's her mom rooting through a dumpster. So the beautiful dichotomy she sets up in terms of character and narrator and plot right away lets us know. And we're going to talk about, in specifics, how she does, each of these writers are doing this, so you'll get it. And we'll come back to that one as well. Novel, Handmaid's Tale. This is amazing because nothing's here. Nothing's going on. Listen to this. A chair, a table, a lamp. Above on the white ceiling, a relief ornament in the shape of a wreath, and in the center of it a blank space, plastered over like the place in a face where the eye has been taken out. There must have been a chandelier once. They've removed anything you could tie a rope to. Margaret Atwood, you know that wonderful little phrase, hook and eye, like when you put a little, you ask your sweetheart to fasten the dress or you go through a gate. So this is one of my poems. Margaret Atwood is so famous and fabulous at this kind of twist. This is a very short poem. You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye. So, Margaret Atwood, let's just have a hand for her. So, those are openings, and they are extremely successful openings, you can see. I will hasten to say that many memoirs and many novels start in what we might call narration. There is, I'm just going to make sure I'm still on Bluetooth here. Multitasking. Should be now. People start with narration. They start with perhaps an enormous wide-angle lens of, say, the boot of Italy, and then we come down to some town on the part of the boot of Italy, and maybe we go through some streets until we get to the people that we're going to meet. So there's a way of starting. There's many ways of starting. But for our purposes here today, I want to concentrate on this, because I think what this boils down to is an ability to chat about this famous phrase, show, don't tell. I don't think it's show, don't tell. I think it's use tell effectively. Use both these attributes of writing in ways that move your story forward in the way that you want them to be moved forward. And always, always, if you are going to tell, make it really, really vivid. So this is one of the things I want to talk about. It's a chronic and obvious, very common thing in workshops and in writing to say, show, don't tell. And it's a very good little, thanks, Michael. Is everybody okay with me just doing things this way?
Yeah.
And those, if you want the course pack, actually, that I have for today, shoot me an email at sans@sansol.com. I'm happy to put it in the mail to you so you can actually go through this stuff by yourself.
Great.
I'd be happy to do that, because then I'd have your email. And by the way, please do sign up on my mailing list. I send out newsletters every month or so, talking about local art stuff that's going on. I'm both a musician, so sometimes it has to do with music in the community. Often it's stuff I'm involved in, but not always. And often I announce my courses and my classes, and I'll be delighted to have you sign up for any of those things. So before you leave today, please sign up on my mailing list, because I'd love to have you. So I believe that tell, the word tell, is a bit of a pejorative. Whereas I don't think that, in fact, telling is bad. It's just weak telling or unvivid telling is ineffective. So I prefer a couple of other words. And here that we have show and we have tell. We have dramatization and narration. So we can narrate something, or we can dramatize something. Those are things, but narration immediately lifts it out of tell into, I'm going to tell the story of this. One of the things I often use as an example is, you could be turning the page from some traumatic scene that took place between a couple fighting or something. You turn the page, and maybe it says part 2 or chapter 9 or whatever, and then it begins something like,
Joe didn't see Rachel for almost 10 years. In the interim, she got custody of the children as expected. She seemed to be traveling all over the place, doing extremely interesting things, bungee jumping in Peru of all places, and hiking to, the top of Machu Picchu, which she posted. What was his name, Tim? Tim himself kept steady with his job, did the best he could under the circumstances. He knew he'd really screwed up. And then one day, across the room at Clancy's crab broiler, he saw her. So that narration, right, moves me, the reader, through 10 years. There is a reason not to have 10 years on the page. You have summarized, somewhat vividly, I tried to do some examples of Machu Picchu and bungee jumping or whatever, to get a sense of what the wife was up to, and what, and if I had a moment longer, I would make that even more what he was up to in his boring little job. I'd figure out what that was. But we know now, do we not, that we are about to move into scene. He saw her across the room at Clancy's crab broiler. Hey, he said, or he pretended not to see her and tried to go out the door. Hey, she said, right? So either way, we can get some information going. So now, this is the third set of words. We've got tell, we've got show, we've got narrate, we've got dramatize, we've got summary, we've got scene. So I could say, I summarized those 10 years. And now I'm about to move into the scene that's going to show something between them that's going to be important for the forwarding of my, in this case, novel. She wants to get back together, or there's a man with her for the first time, or he's out for the first time with a sweetie, or something that's going to create some sort of dramatic tension, which I haven't figured out what that is yet. But the point being, I summarized, and now I'm going to move into scene. So those, I think, are much handier words to summarize and then to scene. So now I want to talk a bit about how we build scene. Because I think this is the...
Microphone.
Mike. I will. I'm just finding what I'm going to pull up next. So here are the things I think are essential for creating effective scenes. And as I say, this is kind of where a lot of my teaching boils down to, because I think these processes can be applied in so many different ways. Number one, a scene has to take place somewhere. Too often in early writing, I see people sort of generating psychological information about their reader. They might have them walking down a road, but suddenly they're in a kitchen and we didn't see how they got there, and then they're suddenly in the garage. But often they don't even have a setting at all. So the first thing, where is my character found? This is just as true in memoir as it is in fiction. What is the narrator of the book doing? Where are we finding her, him, them? What is she, he, they, what are they doing? That's my second thing, activity. We are almost never not doing something. Even if we are sitting still and meditating, we are meditating. Even if we are sitting at a Starbucks staring blankly out the window while the rain falls down, we are still sitting at a Starbucks staring at the rain come down, with our open journal in front of us or whatever, right? There's always, we're hardly ever not doing something. We might be paused in the middle of doing something, that's interesting, but see immediately how activity illustrates character. Right away, there's this beautiful opening to Ladder of Years by Ann Tyler. It goes like this. This all started on a Saturday morning in May, one of those warm spring mornings that smell like clean linen. Just the use of the simile, smells like clean linen, gets a whole lot of characters booted out of the possibility, right? We're probably not going to be following a gas station attendant, right? We're probably not necessarily going to be following a professor of economics, male. Probably not. Now, it would be fun if we found out we were, for each of those cases. But right now, we get the next line is, Delia was standing in the produce section.
Delia had gone to the supermarket to shop for the week's meals. She was standing in the produce section, languidly choosing a bunch of celery. You see how that activity immediately brings us close? Why was it, she was wondering, that celery was not called corduroy plant? That would be much more colorful. And garlic bulbs should be money bags, because they reminded her of the sacks of gold coins in folk tales. So immediately with Delia, I just think this is one of the best openings ever. We understand she's a housewife. She's shopping for the week's meal. She's an organized housewife at that. She has time. I don't know about you, but I'm rarely languidly choosing anything. Right? But we also get this whimsical nature she has. Why can't why can't celery be called corduroy plant? That would be much more colorful. So we're getting this lack of color in this woman's life. She wants, why can't garlic bags be money, garlic things be money bags? Because they remind her of sacks of gold coins in folktales. We get she wants things to be different. That is a longing, a yearning that she has, and bingo, in comes a gentleman asking her about the scallions. That immediately changes her life. So you can see, setting up even in this very mundane activity of choosing a bunch of celery, we're getting character established. So, activity, setting, activity. Then we have objects, and they are often involved in activities, of course, like the celery. That's an object, right? Or the garlic bulb. Those are objects, but they allow the reader this sense of the concrete. We have always been a visual culture, but in the last 200 years, so incredibly so because of video, of cinema, of film. We see visually. That doesn't mean we cannot possibly ignore the other sensory perceptions. They're very, very important to creating a narrator. We need to get inside of their bodies and smell as they do, feel as they do, in addition to see and hear as they do. But visual does a lot of work, and when we concretize into an object, it's fantastic. The reader is with us. So we have this thing. These are my little things. Setting, activity, object, right? Very important. We also have, inside of that, as authors, Richard Ford was once asked how he knew he had completed something, and he said, when I have authorized everything on the page. And it was the first time I made the connection between authorize and author, but of course it's true. So we as authors are, in fiction, we're scanning around to go, what can I do, what can I select to reveal something about my narrator? In Tyler's case, she selected this produce section. She selected the celery in order to reveal something about Delia. Even the choice of name. Her name is Cordelia. She's lost her dad. She feels she's fallen out of her father's graces. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, really, really clever, all of this stuff Ann Tyler did. Anyway, but she's Ann Tyler. Get rid of her. She's too wonderful. So, but that's that select in order to reveal. That's our job. Memoirists, we have a slightly more tricky thing because we have to scan not the whole universe of everything that's possibly available to us. We have to scan what happened in my life, what is true in my environment, what is actually in my life that I can utilize to do that same degree of select and reveal. And we've looked at some examples, and we're going to look more closely at them now. So we have setting, activity, object. We have select in order to reveal. That's a very specific thing. And attached to that is this wonderful exchange of ideas. One is, as writers, we want to imply things. For instance, when I talk about Delia, Delia had gone to the supermarket to shop for the week's meals, or one of those warm spring days like smell like clean linen. You can see that it narrows down what it is that we can think about, and it's implying something about Delia. She's shopping for the week's meals. We're immediately, as readers, the opposite side of imply is infer. So there's this beautiful exchange between writer and reader. The writer implies so that the reader can infer. And it is a beautiful exchange and gives us great power. If I put my character in a long black skirt versus I put my character in a very short frayed skirt with over fishnet stockings that actually have a hole in the knee, I'm being quite purposeful about what I'm trying to imply, right? And we guys, right now, you're inferring the entire time I'm talking. You're taking all kinds of information in besides the information I am delivering through the microphone. That's our job. And as readers, that's our job. We're constantly inferring. So one of the things we're doing today is reading as writers, because we're crawling inside of the writer's work and seeing what they're doing so we can understand how to take that back to our own work. Also, in the building of a scene, setting activity object, select, reveal, imply, infer, there is this lovely thing of a want. The character needs to want something. In the world of theater, we call it the objective. And when we do plays, as Philip knows, the playwright has put all that work in, and our job is to figure it out from the page. What does our character want? How does that make him or her, or in my cases I'm an actor, behave in a certain way, because I'm going after that. Robert Olin Butler introduced the term yearning for this as a writer, and I think that's really nice because it has a very active feel to it. Objective feels, but yearning is this thing you're yearning for, you're longing for. So all of our characters need to want something. Again, looking at that Ann Tyler piece, it's very clear that Delia is yearning for change. Delia wants the world to be more interesting than it currently is, and she gets her wish. So that's going to drive the plot. Sometimes the character doesn't get what they want, and that drives the plot. So, but even at this very early stage, so we've got those things to look at, and now let's go back to our various examples again. We're back to wild. I've already read to you that the trees were tall, but I was taller, right? Standing above them, I'm just going to read the thing again, because if I can go over these 500 million times and still find new stuff, you're hearing them twice, I think won't be a huge problem. The trees were tall, but I was taller, standing above them on a steep mountain slope in Northern California. Moments before, I'd removed my hiking boots, and the left one had fallen into those trees, first catapulting in the air when my enormous backpack toppled onto it, then skittering across the gravelly trail and flying over the edge. It bounced off of a rocky outcropping several feet beneath me before disappearing into the forest canopy below, impossible to retrieve. I let out a stunned gasp. Though I'd been in the wilderness 38 days, and by then I'd come to know that anything could happen and that everything would, but that doesn't mean I wasn't shocked when it did. My boot was gone, actually gone. I clutched its mate to my chest like a baby, though of course it was futile. What is one boot without the other boot? It is nothing, it is useless, an orphan forevermore, and I could take no mercy on it. Let's just pause here for a moment. You see the setting. Trees were tall, but I was taller. She's above tree line, right? Huge outcropping, and the boot is disappeared. This activity, she's hiking with an enormous backpack. The boot is the object. So much work gets done with those three simple things, right? And the other thing I would draw to your attention is that Strayed has selected this scene as a memoirist to start her book. As I said earlier, we'll return to it 2/3 of the way through the book. In the actual chronology, we'll come back to this. But she has chosen as a place to begin this moment when she's going to throw her second boot after it, right? Which we have heard that she does. Now, I just want to use this as an example to show how this writer lets us know that while in that first little scene we were the narrator then, we are on the path with her, hiking. Watch how she pulls us back and pulls us back slowly, slowly, slowly like a camera to understand that she is writing this book from a distant hence. So there is an older, wiser narrator looking back
And we're going to go, obviously, in and out of this form, which is, and this is something memoirists can do, right? Here's my younger self, here's my older self, being able to reflect on that. We don't want to shove the older self in there just willy-nilly. Like, watch how carefully that she does this as this little opening goes on. So she finishes, "I've lifted it high and threw with all my might and watched it fall into the lush trees and out of my life. I was alone. I was barefoot. I was 26 years old and an orphan too. An actual stray, a stranger had observed a couple of weeks before when I told him my name and explained how very loose I was in the world. My father left my life when I was 6. My mother died when I was 22. In the wake of her death, my stepfather morphed from the person I considered my dad into a man I only occasionally recognized. My 2 siblings scattered in their grief in spite of my efforts to hold us together until I gave up and scattered as well. In the years before I pitched my boot over the edge of that mountain, I'd been pitching myself over the edge too. I'd ranged and roamed and railed from Minnesota to New York to Oregon and all across the West, until at last I find myself bootless in the summer of 1995, not so much loose in the world as bound to it. It was a world I'd never been to, and yet known was there all along, one I'd staggered to in sorrow and confusion and fear and hope, a world I thought would both make me into the woman I knew I could become and turn me back into the girl I'd once been. A world that measures 2 feet wide and 2,663 miles long, a world called the Pacific Coast Trail. Spectacular opening. Really beautifully, beautifully rendered, because she starts us so specifically in the dilemma, and then she pulls out and out and out to see why is she there. And we also understand if she knows that it's 2 feet wide and 2,660, we know that she has walked it, and she's going to tell us now the story. So she has set all that narration up as well in the very first bit. So really nice example of how we can do this. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but Cheryl chose that last name after she had gotten herself into morphine addiction to heroin and gotten pregnant and had, I mean, just a mess of a life. She had strayed from who she wanted to be. So she gave herself that name, and I think it's really, really touching. So here's the next bit of Girl on the Train. Again, we've done the pre-mixed gin and tonic. And then we've had the flashback to Tom in the fishing village and the making love. And she takes another sip. It's okay, she's got 3 more in the bag at her feet. TGIF, the fun starts here. It's going to be a lovely weekend, that's what they're telling us. Beautiful sunshine. Oh, and I wanted to say one last thing about the straight piece. You can see the objective. The yearning is to walk the trail, but it's to find her way back to the woman she could become and the girl she once was. So she states it right there. Often we don't get it that clearly stated, but that sense of longing, the objective, the reason is such a lovely thing to explore. Very, very useful. It's going to be a lovely weekend, back to the gin and tonics in the can. That's what they're telling us. Beautiful sunshine, cloudless skies. In the old days, we might have driven to Corleywood with a picnic and the papers, spent all afternoon lying on a blanket in dappled sunlight, drinking wine. We might have barbecued out back with friends, or gone to the Rose and sat in the beer garden, faces flushing with sun and alcohol as the afternoon went on, weaving home arm in arm, falling asleep on the sofa. Beautiful sunshine, cloudless skies, no one to play with, nothing to do. Living like this, the way I'm living at the moment, is harder in the summer when there's so much daylight, so little cover of darkness, when everyone is out and about being flagrantly, aggressively happy. It's exhausting. It makes you feel bad if you're not joining in. The weekend stretches out ahead of me, 48 empty hours to fill. I lift the can to my mouth again, but there's not a drop left. So here too, a yearning, first of all, for the past. You can see that Tom was involved in drinking wine in dappled sunlight, and Tom was involved in going to the beer garden, but alcohol suffused every single bit of it, and look how easily she slips it all in, right? That we get the fact that alcohol was in their life like that, and that now she's just dreading the 48 hours of the summer weekend where she has to figure out what to do with her life, where people are being flagrantly, aggressively happy. So there's a very much darker yearning, which is, babe, I want my life back, and clearly some things happened. that's a nice little piece of dread that's in this that we don't know, but we're going to read on to find out, right? Setting, train, activity, drinking gin and tonics, objects, the can gin and tonic, right? And there's all the other things that come out. And look, this is what I like to call a loop. She's sipping from the can, it's halfway down, then she has that little loop of all the things that she and Tom used to do, and her thing about the weekend being long, she comes back to the can and it's empty. The power of an object to hold the reader always in the scene, so powerful. So these are really handy, crafty techniques and strategies for our work. So, let me just check my time here. Oh yeah. So, we've been with Michelle in her kitchen, making herself, she's put her cheese in the toaster oven, and she has told us, you know, here's the reason I find this so remarkable, that I open the cupboard and take a plate down, and I open the refrigerator, take out the loaf of bread, and I put pieces of paper, of toast, of bread in the toaster oven. She's told us in the end, she writes, in the end, I didn't just make toast, I made cheese toast, moving my slices of bread to the microwave and melting a fat mess of gooey cheddar between them. I then carried my plate outside to the backyard. I didn't have to tell anyone I was going, I just went. I wasn't bare feet wearing a pair of shorts. The chill of winter had finally lifted. The crocuses were just starting to push up through the beds along our back wall. The air smelled like spring. I sat on the steps of our veranda, feeling the warmth of the day's sun still caught in the slate beneath my feet. A dog started barking somewhere in the distance, and my own dogs paused to listen, seeming momentarily confused. It occurred to me that it was a jarring sound for them, given that we didn't have neighbors, let alone neighbor dogs, at the White House. For them, all this was new. As the dogs loped off to explore the perimeter of the yard, I ate my toast in the dark, feeling alone in the best possible way. My mind wasn't on the group of guards with guns sitting less than 100 yards away in the custom-built command post inside our garage, or the fact that I still can't walk down the street without a security detail. I was thinking about the new, I wasn't thinking about the new president, or for that matter, the old president either. I was thinking instead about how in a few minutes, I would go back inside my house, wash my plate in the sink, and head up to bed, maybe opening a window so I could feel the spring air. How glorious that would be. I was thinking, too, that the stillness was affording me a first real opportunity to reflect. As First Lady, I'd get to the end of a busy week and need to be reminded how it had started. But time is beginning to feel different. My girls who arrived at the White House with their Polly Pockets, a blanket named Blanky, and a stuffed tiger named Tiger, are now teenagers, young women with plans and voices of their own. My husband is making his own adjustments to life after the White House, catching his own breath, and here I am in this new place with a lot I want to say.
Wow.
Now, remember the little stirred gasp when I finished that about this little paragraph about her making the sandwich? Again, I want to draw to your attention that that was in the kitchen, making herself cheese toast, pulling our attention to the plate and to the bread and to the toaster oven. So the power of the concrete is so incredibly important. And each of these, you will notice, are all single people. I'm very purposefully just concentrating right now on introducing a character, introducing a narrator. If we have time, I've got a couple scenes with dialogue, because that becomes its own interesting thing as well. But for now, this is what I'm trying to really underscore, how we introduce, and it's a very wise thing to do. Just as it's so much easier when you walk into a party and maybe your friend is over here, and you can chat with the friend for a while, and then you're kind of looking around, and then little by little, maybe another person comes over, and then another person comes over, and you're being introduced to people little by little at this party. It doesn't seem so overwhelming. Then you walk in, and you're suddenly having to put something. That's exactly what it's like for our reader. They really like to be taken slowly into the meetings of people. And so starting is not always, of course, the only way to start. There's a million examples otherwise, but it's very useful to get to know this one character by where we find them and what they are doing. And you can see that in all of these examples, that's what's happening. So here we are with Cal, where the Rooks have got hold of something, right? And he could kill it, but he thinks that would be a little bit impertinent. He likes the Rooks. Cal read somewhere they're smart as hell. They can get to know you, bring you presents even.
For 3 months now, we understand he's newly come, so now we've got how long he's been there. For 3 months now, he's been trying to butter them up with scraps left on the big stump toward the bottom of the garden. They watch him trudge up and down through the grass from the ivy-loaded oak where they have their colony, and as soon as he's a safe distance away, they swoop down to squabble and comment raucously over the scraps. But they keep a cynical eye on Cal, and if he tries to move closer, they're gone. Back into the oak to jeer down at him and drop twigs on his head. Yesterday afternoon, he was in his living room, stripping away the mildewed wallpaper, and a sleek, mid-sized rook landed on the sill of the open window, yelled what was obviously an insult, and then flapped off, laughing. One of the things that I love, in addition to that rook, that's the rooks that have got something on the grass, the fact that he has been scraping that wallpaper and now it's confirmed, because we just get that he is that I like that Cal has a sense of humor, but I also get a little yearning in there. He's lonely. And the rooks are a companionship. I mean, he has a wonderful attitude about it, the dropping twigs on the head and stuff. But you can see that's something that's missing. And so I'm already going, okay, so what's happened there, right? Mystery, pulling me forward. He brings us back to the thing on the lawn. It's so smart. The thing on the lawn twists wildly, shaking the long grass. A big daddy rook jumps closer, aims one neat, ferocious stab at his beak, and the thing goes still. I just so admire the way the tension is held here with that thing that's wriggling on the grass and the rooks. Rabbit, maybe? Cal has seen them out there in the early mornings, nibbling and dashing in the dew. Their holes are somewhere in his back field, down by the broad copse of hazels and rowans. Once his firearm license comes through, he's got a firearm license. You see how this stuff just comes in and you just don't even see it, and there it is? Once his firearm license comes through, he's planning to see if he remembers what his grandpa taught him about skinning game, and if the mule-tempered broadband will deign to find him a recipe for rabbit stew. The rooks crowding, pecking hard, and bracing their feet to jerk out bites of flesh, more of them zooming down from the tree to jostle in on the action. Cal watches them for a while, stretching out his legs and rolling one shoulder in circles. Isn't that a beautiful? You just did it. Working on the house is using muscles he'd forgotten he had. He finds new aches every morning, although some of that is likely from sleeping on a cheap mattress on the floor. Cal is too old and too big for that, but there's no point in bringing good furniture into the dust and damp and mold. He'll buy that stuff once he has the house in shape, once he figures out where to buy it. All that was Donna's department. Meanwhile, he doesn't mind the aches. They satisfy him. Along with the blisters and thickening calluses, they're solid, earned proof of what his life is now. So, big mystery. Why is he here? Where's Donna? What's he doing? The whole stuff about the grandpa and the skinning game. And now I'm getting to know this character. But again, the use of setting, activity, object to help ground that, the selection of this author to choose those things. And I want to just veer off for one moment here on the topic of inner thought. One of, I think, the dangers of either form, memoir or fiction, is we want to try and deliver information to the reader through inner thought that is obvious and awkward. If I were reading this, loving the writing, and he rolls one shoulder in that wonderful way, ever since he'd left Chicago and his marriage behind, and bought this piece of property in Ireland, he'd been questioning his motivations for doing so. His gun would come through soon. It'd be great to have it back on his hip again. You know, it's not as lovely as what it is that was given to us. We have to lean in and get all that information. The inner thought is given in absolute specifics, more use of activities and objects. When his firearm license comes through, we're putting that into our little mental backpack of information that we're carrying along in the story already, right? So this is a great technique to remember. And as you read, and this is one of the things I really encourage so much, that as you begin to read or reread books that you love, watch what they're doing. I have a dear writer mentor, years and years and years ago, said this simple thing, is that he became a real writer when he began to ask, how did they do that? He was reading, how did they do that? And that was true for me too. I began to go, okay, wow, that POV just changed.
When on earth did that happen? That is really weird. Been with her, and now it's over with him. I remember this distinctly in Possession by A.S. Byatt. I was riding on a train from Iowa City, where I was getting my MFA, back to California for Christmas. And I went back up the page. Here it's with Peter. Here it's with Peter. Oh, look at that. It is when Meg passed the piece of paper across the table to him. The POV went with the piece of paper. There was like, light bulb! So it's that wonderful thing of beginning to look how do writers do it, and that is very much what I'm trying to express to you today, is just looking this closely. Let's just look at the Glass Castle and maybe look at one with dialogue. Just talk about it. In fact, this will be a good segue. So she's in the taxi, wondering if she's overdressed for the evening. There's her mother, okay? Now, again, very lovely use of what I like to call a loop rather than a flashback. I think of a loop as, here you are moving forward in the storyline, from your point of view, we're going to be like this, and we're in the taxi, and we go into this loop of information, and we come back to the taxi. And the reader hardly even knows, this is a great piece of craft, the reader hardly even knows they got taken on that journey, so watch how she accomplishes this. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Mom stood 15 feet away. She had tied rags around her shoulders to keep out the spring chill and was picking through the trash while her dog, a black and white terrier mix, played at her feet. Mom's gestures were all familiar. The way she tilted her head and thrust out her lower lip when steadying items of potential value that she hoisted out of the dumpster. The way her eyes widened with childish glee when she found something she liked. Her long hair was streaked with gray, tangled and matted, and her eyes had sunk deep into their sockets. But still she reminded me of the mom she'd been when I was a kid, swan diving off cliffs and painting in the desert and reading Shakespeare aloud. I'll pause here to say, it was so lovely for me to realize, you know, an attitude I have towards homeless, right? And here's their background. Swan diving off cliffs, painting in the desert, reading Shakespeare aloud. Beautiful, right? We get a whole, oh, my mind just went, whoop, little bias there. Anyway, her cheekbones were still high and strong, but the skin was parched and ruddy from all those winters and summers, exposed to the elements, to the people walking by. She probably looked like any of the thousands of homeless people in New York City. It had been months since I laid eyes on Mom, and when she looked up, I was overcome with panic that she'd see me and call out my name, and that someone on the way to the same party would spot us together, and Mom would introduce herself, and my secret would be out. I slid down in my seat and asked the driver to turn around and take me home to Park Avenue. The taxi pulled up in front of my building. The doorman held the door for me, and the elevator man took me up to my floor. My husband was working late, as he did most nights, and the apartment was silent except for the click of my heels on the polished wood floor. I was still rattled from seeing Mom, the unexpectedness of coming across her, the sight of her rooting happily through the dumpster. I put some Vivaldi on, hoping the music would settle me down. Now, everyone knows where Park Avenue is in New York City. This is not like the Lower East Side, where you might have a 5-floor walk-up tub with a kitchen flat, right? She lives on Park Avenue. She has a doorman. She has an elevator man. She has parquet floors, and she puts on Vivaldi. These are all selected by this memoirist with purpose to give information to us, the reader. She is implying all kinds of things about class and status and richness so that we can infer how interesting that this is your life and your mother's rooted through a dumpster. So we do this just as carefully in memoir as we do in fiction, is that selection to reveal, the select to reveal, right? So one last thing, and then I'll take some questions. This is, oh, and the secret will be out. That's a nice little piece of mystery, right? I don't want anyone to know this about my mom or my parents. So Jeanette gets in touch with her mother through a friend of a friend or something, and they agree to meet for lunch. Now, just briefly, I want you to watch how setting, activity, object come into play in this short conversation, and how deftly Jeanette utilizes them to continue to create both the visual, but also what's the actual dynamic between the mother and the daughter. Objective. Jeanette has come, I think, to try and change her mom. Pure and simple. Why are you rooting through the dumpster? And Jeanette's mom has come probably to get a nice lunch, right? Yeah. So let's also watch how those objectives, those yearnings, if you will, change in the middle of the scene, because they will sometimes, which is a fun thing to keep in mind about that. So, brief little scene. Mom was sitting at a booth studying the menu when I arrived. It's at a Chinese restaurant, that's where they've met. She'd made an effort to fix herself up. She wore a bulky gray sweater with only a few light stains and black leather men's shoes. She'd washed her face, but her neck and temples were still dark with grime. She waved enthusiastically when she saw me. "It's my baby girl," she called out. I kissed her cheek. Mom had dumped all the plastic packets of soy sauce and duck sauce and hot and spicy mustard from the table into her purse. Now she emptied a wooden bowl of dried noodles into it as well. "A little snack for later on," she explained. Look at the work that's done there, right? With objects. She has put them into her purse. I mean, for crying out loud, the dried noodles. That is a mess there in the bottom of the purse. We ordered. Mom chose the seafood delight. "You know how I love my seafood," she said. She started talking about Picasso. She'd seen a retrospective of his work and decided he was hugely overrated. All the Cubist stuff was gimmicky, as far as she was concerned. He hadn't really done anything worthwhile since his Rose period. This is an example of summarizing dialogue. We don't get that in dialogue, right? We're summarized, but now we're moving into dialogue. A great example of summary into scene, right? Or the narrative of the dialogue into the dramatization now. Here we go. "I'm worried about you," I said. "Tell me what I can do to help." Her smile faded. "What makes you think I need your help?" "I'm not rich," I said. Park Avenue. "But I have some money. Tell me what it is you need." She thought for a moment. "I could use an electrolysis treatment." "Be serious." "I am serious. If a woman looks good, she feels good." "Come on, Mom." I felt my shoulders tightening up the way they invariably did during these conversations. "I'm talking about something that'll help you change your life, make it better." "You want me to change my life?" Mom said. "I'm fine. You're the one who needs help. Your values are all confused." "Mom, I saw you picking through trash in the East Village a few days ago." "Well, people in this country are too wasteful. It's my way of recycling." She took a bite of her seafood delight. See how the movie, so to speak, is keeping here? "Why didn't you say hello?" "I was too ashamed, Mom. I hid." Mom pointed her chopsticks at me. "You see," she said, "right there. That's exactly what I'm saying. You're way too easily embarrassed. Your father and I are who we are. Accept it." "And what am I supposed to tell people about my parents?" "Just tell the truth," Mom said. "That's simple enough." So, objective for Jeanette, foiled, right? Objective for Mom, shifts, but she's cool with who she is, right? Look at how those chopsticks keep where we are, the setting and the activity alive. You know, her tightening of her shoulders certainly helps a lot. So there's a lot in terms of these two characters both have their yearnings. The author is giving us activity inside of that dialogue to keep the camera, so to speak, of point of view alive, right? So a lot is moving very well in this. And what I love especially about this scene is this, I think, Jeanette uses as the reason to go and inspect her life and figure out this dichotomy. And so when her mother says, "Just tell the truth," that's what the glass castle does, right? So it's kind of a marvelous thing. And we, like, as with Wilde, this is a scene to which we will return later in the book, right? Or the spotting of the mother digging through the dumpster, because then it takes on a slightly different meaning put out in the context. But here too, speaking of our structural stuff, Jeanette used it to start her book, because it's a moment of crisis illumination right there that begins to set everything else, the chain in motion. So I'm going to pause or stop there. I'm really happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much.
choose?
The name of the very first book I read from that's Wild by Cheryl Strayed.
Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Thank you.
Why did you think you would need a visual when it was so interesting anyway?
I love that you asked that question. That way.
Thank you.
So she's asked, why did I use visuals when it was so interesting this way? Well, first of all, thank you for that compliment. I, for many, many years, have taught workshops where I read pieces aloud. But increasingly, people want to see the writing on the page, because some people don't learn well that way. I sometimes think it's a bit generational, that many of us grew up learning, you know, just oral was enough, A-U-R-A-L. But I do see that people like to see it on the page. I prefer to teach without it, because what happens is people stop listening to me and keep reading. So sometimes I will actually read and then black the screen out so that what I'm saying about it will be clear. But often, when I have a handout, which I often use, then people can take a circle and take it home and study it again. So again, I'll say if anybody wants that course back, I'm happy to send it out. So just be in touch. So, great question, thank you. Anybody else have anything to ask or say? Answered all the questions. Yes, please.
I had a writing course many years ago called Story Building for Writers. And he used many metaphors, the teacher used many metaphors from Broadway musicals and carpentry. And I found it very enlightening because his examples were so down to earth. And I think you have very much the same approach. So this has been a really, really illuminating session. Thank you.
Thank you. A teacher who taught a class about story building using examples from Broadway shows and carpentry.
Nice.
I can really see those things, the transitions in Broadway shows, what's being said or pervaded, and of course carpentry are fantastic metaphors for how we build things and put things together and join things in interesting ways and lovely ways too. Yeah, that's a great comment, and thank you for the compliment. Yes, please.
When you left Scientology, did you leave without incident?
Thank you for asking. When I left Scientology, did I leave without incident? Other than the nonsense that was rattling around in my brain for one while, I did. I was fortunate in when I chose to leave. Hubbard, it's interesting for me now when I read the book, I wrote the book, that Hubbard had died in '87, and I left about '89. And I think what happened is David Miscavige, who was now the head of the church, the cult, hadn't yet risen into the kind of, you know, power that he has now. So I was able to sidle away. The incident, and I think it helped a lot that I was getting my MFA in fiction at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And then because I didn't know what on earth I was going to do with my life, I was then 41. I went over across the river to the drama department and got a second MFA in theater arts, because why not, right? But I was just like terrified. The thing that probably was the biggest change is I lost 7 years of very, very dear friends. They just had to draw the line. That was just the way they operate. I've reclaimed some of those now because they've also left. But largely, I lost a sweetheart, and all that, you know, acquaintanceship and dear, dear friendships were gone. But other than that, okay, yeah.
Oh, I love your lecture today. I just thought it was so wonderful and illuminating. You discussed Tyler and Strayed using their first paragraphs as metaphors for their life. She chucked the boot, she pitched the boot, and she had pitched her life in recent years, And that was Strayed. And then, and Tyler, the celery, she was longing for color in her life. And these are metaphors in a first scene. I love how I never thought of that. I've been reading all my life and writing, and that's a wonderful thing. Then you began to discuss dialogue. And you read a summary of dialogue, and then you read a little bit of real dialogue. What are you a bigger fan of for Memoir?
No, my point was in the, and thank you for that. It's very lovely to hear that reflected back, because I do think, and that's the value of reading as a writer, is to go back to favorite books. every time I want to teach something that I think is important, I just go pull books from my shelf, and almost always I find what I think is good writing in a book I really loved. It's a beautiful, sometimes it doesn't always do it as tidily or neatly or briefly as I want, and so I won't necessarily use it. But what I did with the Jeanette Walls piece was actually show how she summarized the conversation. So she said, she started talking about Picasso, she'd said a retrospective, so she didn't put that into actual dialogue with food or the server or the restaurant. She summarized that, and her objective as a writer is to get, again, the same thing as I have a mother who knows about Picasso. I have a mother who knows enough about Picasso to say she likes the Rose period and thinks everything else is gimmicky. So the authorial purpose is in there, but it's not the authorial purpose to dramatize that particular piece of conversation, because it's not doing any kind of work that can't be done by summarizing. And I think that's a really, really handy technique to use. You can get through the basics of the scene and then slow down to what the essentials of the scene are. It's a really good technique to begin to examine. Yeah. Yes.
I liked your phrase select to reveal in contrast to the show not tell idea, because we don't want to show everything. We want to be very particular about what we select and what it means. And that way, that conciseness tells so much. And now I want to put a plug in for your book, your craft book.
Thank you.
I have used that a million times, and it was in there that I learned about the difference between scene and narration, and to me that's vital, and it goes right back to this select to reveal. So I think you should tell us more about your book.
Such a great point here, which is that I'll tell a story about this. So what she's bringing up is the select to reveal is such an important thing that I can't say enough about authorial purpose. One of the things I started to do in my most recent works is to write down my purpose in a given scene. What do I want a scene to do? I call it, what does a scene need to accomplish? And it's one of the exercises in my little book. Thanks for the plug. When I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, I put up the story in workshop, and I had intended to sort of imply that this, at a barbecue, that this girl was reflecting on an abortion and kind of regretting it. And I never had an abortion, but I was guessing at what things might do, instruments and blades. And so I brought the attention to all of the implements of the chicken being grilled and all the things that were going on, everything. And Frank Conroy, may his soul sort of rest in peace, this was a devastating workshop for me, called this abject naturalism. That I was giving too much detail. I had heard that show means details, and so therefore detail was good. And so I had not learned this idea of selecting. And I really got the message when I got my little pile of manuscripts home, and someone had written in the margin, it really does take a long time to cook chicken on the grill, doesn't it? But that gave me so much information that if you're going to include something, it's got to be doing work. It's got to be selected with care. And you've got to make sure you know what its purpose is. The reader does a lot of work for us. And in fact, readers love to feel smart. It's better to show rather than tell for that alone, because you engage them. They lean into the page. It's like, oh, I think I get it. I think, yes, I got it. That is an engaged reader. Like how Tana French got me at the opening of The Searcher. It was like, look at this. Oh my God, I'm guessing all of this. I'm right. It was great. And I really fell in love with the character. So yeah, select to reveal, and all of the things I covered today actually are in a chapter called Some Essentials, because I think they are essentials in my craft book. Yes?
Yes, I have observed, and I'm curious if you have as well, that our writing style has changed. And I noticed you mentioned details, because you read the older books before television and so on. There's tremendous detail, and I hear the younger people complaining, oh, they just went on and on about this dress that swirling. And so I explained that you needed the detail then because we just turn on the television or open up our book. We know what the ocean looks like, so you don't need to describe all of that. And I noticed that our writing has become less detailed, but a little more shorter and kind of more chalky and to the details. And that's where we have evolved, rather than back to Dickens, who would write these flowery.
Yeah, I think there's two things there that styles changed. It was like a Henry James novel, you sort of go, God, give me a scene, please, you know. But it's all psychologically acute and everything. But I will say, yes, I agree with that. That part of it is you don't need to go into detail about the flounces on the dress, to use your example, because we all have PBS, you know. We can just go watch and see, you know, Pride and Prejudice or whatever. But I also think that style in everything is a pendulum. And my mother used to say that she felt styles really changed, like Hemingway's terse, short style came in part because this used to be the way you wrote.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that with a typewriter, you went so that it served the sort of, you know, in theater we call it stichomythia, the really short stuff that he's famous for in his dialogue. But I think that, again, I belong to this rather charming little thing called BookBub. And every day into my inbox comes a list of 10 books. And they're all Kindle books, and they're like anywhere between free to $2.99. They're usually 99 cents. And it covers, I mean, just the other day, you know, one of Amy Tan's books was in there, Stephen King's books there, but often they're books that have won really nice prizes, or they've gotten 4,562 reviews on Goodreads or something. I've never heard of them. But what I love about this is that you see, and you kind of sign up for the ones you want, right, what you're interested in, is that there are people who still long and yearn for the kind of style that is represented by what you just said. And there are others who want, I want something to happen on every page, I want, you know, blah, 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 blah. So that's style as much as a reader as it is for a writer, you know. But in general, yes, styles change and they will always change. And then they will change again, so, yeah. So maybe one or two more and then we'll take a break. Yes, please.
Could you talk about the revision process, how to make it most effective?
Revision. Well, first of all, the first thing I write in my classrooms when I teach, when I was a professor, I would write, writing is rewriting. So that would be the first thing I would say. Not everybody's true for that. Lots of people, I've just recently heard about this whole thing, probably some of you have too. Some people are plotters, and some people are pantsers. Have you heard about this? Yes. So the plotters are people that do a really thorough breakdown of every scene and in their book, and then the breakdowns of the scenes inside of the scenes, and they know that they've got to have 3 climaxes in this. It's all, I think, very much based actually on screenwriting. And then there are those of us who are pantsers, which seems to be negative, because I think it comes from, I know it comes from, we fly by the seat of our pants. But then I read a really lovely essay that said, actually, we're all doing the exact same work, just in different order. So for my revision, I would say that if you spoke to, who wrote World According to Garp? John Irving. If you asked John Irving that question, he would say, well, once I've got my ending, so this is what he's famous for, I just write to that ending, and I don't really need to rewrite. I don't really need to revise. But there's a lot of people for whom that second and third and fourth iteration is where, you know, some people put it like this. The first draft is the bones, and the second draft is the you know, corpuscles or something, and the third draft, and then by the time you get to the seventh, it's the skin, you know, the gloss. I don't think it's that precise. I think often we figure out bones on our third draft. It's like, woo, going down the wrong thing here. I got to come back and do this instead. I'm just a great believer. I love revision because for me, that's where the writing goes to town. I can really dig in to that description when it seems right. I can say, oh, you know, I'm nodding off in front of my own laptop. It's like, something's got to happen. Like maybe you should just delete this entire page, you know. So those are great things to just bear in mind. I think to look at, am I, like specific questions like, are my characters' wants clear?
Is there a really clear obstacle to their progression through what they're trying to accomplish? Am I making this satisfying for the reader? Is every scene in the book pushing something forward? I have two things about that. I rewrote my book, Catching Heaven, and I did a draft, and I thought, it's 100 pages too long. Nobody told me that. I just knew it was too long. I just knew it. So I went in and I cut the chapter 1, which is so brilliant and amazing and fabulous, and I worked on it like 4 million times, and no one will really know if that's true because it's now cut. But, it was amazing to see how much I didn't need that first 30 pages. And then I found another chapter that did the exact same work as another chapter did. I was just doing the same character choices, the same character epiphany. I could take that 30 pages out. So that sort of thing can be very useful in a revision as well. Is everything pushing my story forward? Is everything, as Richard Ford said, am I authorizing everything on the page? Do I know why it's there? Down to, Flaubert's famous, he knew he was done when he spent the afternoon changing a semicolon to a period and back again. That's that degree of understanding of your own work. And I think everybody comes to their own place with revision. And sometimes I just knew I finished Catching Heaven, and my memoir too. It's like, I now know I'm done. But there were many years there where I knew I wasn't. I just knew it wasn't done. So, but then when it was finished, it felt really finished. So, yes, one last question.
Do you ever print out things to read before you revise them, or do you ask?
Always.
Okay.
Not only that, I read them aloud. Boy, do you learn a lot. Read it aloud. Again, I have various friends with partners who, that sounds mean, sorry, who have sweethearts who will sit opposite them with a copy of the manuscript while they read aloud and circle where they're stumbling, circle where they miss something, because often that's where something's not quite working. But definitely, I think printing things out is vital. And reading them aloud, at least in the privacy of your own room, just hear it, you'll just, oh my God, does that go on too long? And oh, I repeated this word, and oh, this whole thing I just covered 2 pages ago, I can take it out. It's fantastic to do that. Thank you all so much. I'll be there ready to sign books if you want to. Thank you.